Welcome back to another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Join us on our journey to learn more about the Christian faith and how we can live it out in our modern world. We have a CCNC first for you today, a unique opportunity to go behind the scenes with a Catholic filmmaker. This is a first for us, so we hope you enjoy. Over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Rigel. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in for another episode of Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. I'm caffeinated. I've got a supersized coffee from McDonald's. Not my go-to, but my wife wanted McDonald's, so we went. So I'm caffeinated for this conversation. And thank you all for joining us. Today, we are chatting about should we, or maybe we should, maybe this is advice, not a question, should we forget Hollywood? Or can there be something we can take out of Hollywood, looking at the film industry? So we're talking about maybe forgetting Hollywood, but bringing hope to the hopeless. And if the reason for that being the title of the episode isn't obvious, it will become obvious as we get into the conversation here with our friend Anthony D'Ambrosio. But to frame the conversation before we dive in here, I'm going to pull a quote from a 2021 article by a gentleman named Alejandro Pardo. And he wrote as follows: "The social responsibility of film and audiovisual media professionals contributes to promoting the common good. Indeed, the defense of the truth and dignity of the human person, the effort to present positive themes and values, and the resistance against pressures of all kinds, combining freedom and creativity, not only benefit each person, but also to the whole of society. This is what Pope St. John Paul II had made manifest in his 1988 speech to Hollywood, when he said, 'You help your fellow citizens to enjoy leisure, to appreciate art, and to profit from culture.' At the same time, while performing their professional duties, Pope St. John Paul II encouraged them to, and I quote, 'be always aware of how your activities affect the whole world community, how they serve the cause of universal solidarity.' And he concluded with an explicit appeal. 'I ask you to choose the common good. It means honoring the dignity of every human being.'" Now that was a long time ago. That was 35 plus years, roughly. And I don't know that we would say some of those same things about Hollywood today. Probably not, hence the name of the episode here, Forgetting Hollywood. To have this conversation with us, we are joined by Anthony D'Ambrosio. He is a storyteller and a marketing specialist who has spent the last 5 years studying how movements can be ignited by shared purpose and belonging. Through his company, Sherwood Fellows, he has participated in relaunching the brands of over 100 organizations. Now, he is the writer and director of The Triumph of the Heart, an upcoming feature-length film about the passion of Saint Maximilian Kolbe. Anthony's interests span from philosophy to the mythology and rituals of tribal peoples. He ran an underground fight club in his seminary, and among his favorite things are simmering a pot of homemade Italian red sauce, keeping houseplants alive, and writing poetry. So Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here with you guys.
Awesome. Before we get into anything relevant to this conversation, I need to know about the underground fight club in the seminary. Tell us about that.
That is what I care most about too. So please tell us that story.
I need to really consider if I should keep that line in my bio, because it's such a every single podcast interview I have now has to start with that story. And if anybody is following me, then they probably are getting tired of hearing about it. But hopefully these are all people that don't know me and therefore can perhaps discover the story afresh. But I grew up Catholic, cradle Catholic, was super into the church, was homeschooled, conservative kid. My dad is a theologian, rather well-known theologian and teacher, professor of theology at University of Dallas. I ended up kind of rebelling in my faith, becoming a sort of a emo rock star in my high school era. And then as a person of extremes, I had a conversion that was definitely a, knock you off your horse type St. Paul conversion during my high school era, and decided to leave all of that behind and go to seminary, hoping to sort of find a place there where I would be knocked into shape by the Catholic boot camp process that would likely ensue. And that's certainly part of what happened, and perhaps more explicitly what happened than I even expected. I met somebody there who is a Golden Glove boxer. This is a guy who, Tim Chaucer, he literally sounded like an ogre. He looked like an ogre. He invited me to come to his house one time, or to his room, and he pauses me, starts by grabbing like boxers out of a dirty hamper and like blowing his nose in them and like throwing him in. I literally am like, this guy is Shrek. And so I called him that. I'm like, Shrek, what's up? And he's like, I think that all these, seminarians that are walking around with their heads like on sticks, it's like they think that their bodies are just vehicles for theology, like they're vehicles for brains that just do theological computation and spit out the right arguments that will change the world. And the real world, let me tell you, just doesn't work that way, and nobody's going to listen to you if you don't actually know how to put your body behind the punches that you're delivering with your mouth. And so I want to teach you how to box. And he was a Golden Glove boxer, was a Marine, and it invited me to this sort of like small group of people that he was starting to like teach how to box. Ultimately, we decided on these like very dreary Minnesotan February Fridays that had nothing else going on, that we would start doing bouts in the basement of the seminary, where we would like, post a heavyweight, post a lightweight match, and a cruiserweight, and just, like the RA of fourth floor going against the RA of second floor, and kind of stoke some rivalries internally in the seminary to kind of make an audience get really excited. And we would have a talk about God and about masculinity at the beginning of the bout. One of the priests inevitably would be like the judge, and of course, like these were not super official amateur fights, but they definitely got pretty intense. And after my first fight, I just absolutely fell in love with the experience of the combat. I would say fell in love with the sport, but I think it was much more like falling in love with like the inner fire of masculinity that I didn't know was there, and becoming an evangelist for that. And so he left that year, and I was like, let's go bigger with this, and let's start challenging all of the guys in Ireland Hall, the men's dorm across the street from us. Let's challenge them for a bout and get all of them in the basement of the seminary and do like this big sort of thing about masculinity. And eventually we had, 400 people from men from different walks of life, and we're all sort of watching these fights and being preached to, people who never would have been there, never would have walked in, set foot in a church or the seminary, but who were really drawn by, the violence. But, I think perhaps by the underlying movement of masculinity that was kind of happening on campus. So one of my most favorite moments of my life was getting to be a part of helping that go live. So, yeah.
That's got to be the most interesting seminary story that I've heard, at least to date.
Yeah,
it's actually one of the things I would like to make a movie on eventually.
That would be cool.
It really is like one of these like unexpected fight clubs, like in a seminary. It would be really fun. Yeah.
So maybe before we get into chatting specifically about movies, I think that's probably a good segue. But let's not jump ahead needlessly. You obviously left the seminary at some point. We've chatted with your brother on another episode, and so we know a bit about the story about what you guys are doing together at Sherwood Fellows and stuff. But maybe walk us through a little bit. How did your time at seminary end, and then what happened from there? That's ultimately led you to where you are now, where you're not just a marketing professional but also a filmmaker. Sort of walk us through that intermediate stage.
And if we can rewind even just a little bit more, I'd love to hear about the conversion you had in high school too, that actually led you to seminary.
Yeah, I think that they're both definitely tied together, and certainly definitely tied to the theme of dignity that you kind of brought up in the opening quote. When I was in high school, I had been a homeschooled kid, got thrown into this highly politicized culture that public school is, and realized that the sort of appeal to dignity and honor that was present in the culture that I had grown up in did not work at all in the culture of American secular, the jungle of public school. And I realized that if I wanted to get ahead, I had to sort of in some way capitulate to this culture and become one of the dogs eating the other dogs. And the way that I did that was becoming really sarcastic and using a sort of like playful punk attitude that was just kind of resentful, angry, but funny, to be my like guard against the world. And I was trying to sort of get revenge fame through my band, against all the people that like didn't believe in me or hated me, or made fun of me or bullied me. And as I started to actually get success with the band, I began to just realize that, this way of life that was the moderating, I guess, underlying value set for all the people that I was in touch with, it just made it so impossible to have real, true communion and intimacy with anyone. Everyone ultimately was a tool to be used for your own social, elevation. And everybody was somebody that could be sacrificed at the foot of that altar, if it meant getting ahead socially. And so I saw in some way enough success to just see where that road was going, and I was like, that's empty, and I am already hating this. It's already like eating at my person, my soul. And I grew up in a family that had enough goodness in it to have something that I could return to, and something that I could measure life by and say, maybe my parents are old fashioned and boring and very aggravating in many ways, but there's something about their world and the way that they do life that is just so much better than what I'm experiencing out here. Even if I want to be powerful, that weakness is something I'm attracted to. And my conversion happened, I think, through a retreat as I was breaking up the band. I can go more into that if you want to hear about it, but there's sort of a dramatic, moment of leaving the nets behind, if you will, and hearing God's voice and just saying, okay, I'm all in. But that was a very naive, like, all in, and I didn't really know what it meant to be a radical Christian at all outside of the images of saints that I had seen. And almost all saints, that are popular are all like clergy, right? So all the images that we have that are most prominent in our lives for what holiness looks like, it looks like celibacy. It looks like, not the lay vocation. And so as I was in the, in the seminary, I was beginning to learn about what the lay vocation really was, and seeing that that's actually the missionary arm, the front lines of the church, and that, the parish is really like and the priesthood is honestly like a sacramental dispensary. Like it's like, do this over and over and over and over again, and keep on like being the medic for all these people who are going out and fighting the fight. And I realized that was what I wanted to be and wanted to do, even though I felt totally inequipped and ill-equipped to do that. My dad is a theologian. I was very equipped to be a theologian myself, or a philosophy professor, or a priest, but had no idea what it would look like to actually have a career where I could provide for a family, and go out into the business world. And so I was terrified of that, and graduated with a philosophy degree, and was like, okay, what am I going to do now that my resume says seminary and philosophy degree? You're pretty much pigeonholed to teaching or to, youth ministry. And so that's what I did for 6 years after that. I got posted up in a mega church in Texas. Anybody who's been to Texas probably understands that like the churches in Texas are like everything else, and they're just bigger. And so I was in a church that had over 10,000 families, and started out with a youth group that was only maybe 20 kids. So if you think about like the misses there, it was a pretty huge responsibility to figure out how to like get to those thousands and thousands of kids who were being missed by our ministry. And I began to utilize a lot of the things that I'd learned in seminary and learned in my band when I was doing that, and found that it was like a very entrepreneurial kind of open world type challenge, that even though I didn't really know what God was doing with that, it was very much like preparing me wax on, wax off style for like for running my own business, for getting into the creative industry, and ultimately for doing what I'm doing now.
And maybe, because we have talked with your brother before, and I know you guys work together, obviously. You have slightly different paths, but obviously you guys are twins, so there's a lot of biological similarities, and then even personality and stuff. What are some of the things that would differentiate, say, you from your brother in your approaches to being out in the world, committed to the faith, and doing what you're doing? Because I think you both do an incredible job of it, but you do it very differently. So what would you say is sort of different about you and your brother in your approaches to living your faith in the secular world, sort of on the front lines?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've always people have always asked me my whole life, like, what's the big difference between you and your brother, right? Outside of the fact that he has a massive scar on his chin that he got during his own college experience. But I would say that he's always been the kick in the front door type guy, and I'm the like, let's try to see if a window's open somewhere kind of guy. If anyone follows us both on LinkedIn, they will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Totally.
And that has been the case our entire lives. And so I think that like I really have a desire to see both of us want to see culture change, and both of us are like champions of that. But the way that I particularly want to approach it as an artist is to be someone who is, I guess, solving a problem of attraction and of beauty. I think without a underlying engine of beauty, our ability to convert, to even maintain our own children in the culture is going to be lost. I think that if you look at the media consumption of children and of young people, we're talking 2 hours per day at least of TV shows and movies. If you as a parent are not having 2 hours of meaningful, vulnerable conversation about values with your kids every day, you're being outcompeted by media, and whatever media is coming into your house is the one that is going to bring the values to your child that the child will ultimately have. So I see that problem. I saw it as a youth minister. It's even worse now. And I realize that to solve that problem, it's going to take a massive turning around of the engine of Catholic culture to become at the zenith of culture again through beauty.
So, Anthony, your career's kind of been defined by creative pursuits. Like you've had Catholic Creatives, for example, sold that business, and then you started Sherwood Fellows with Marcelino. What is it that attracts you to, first of all, creative pursuits besides it being the skill that you have, and then tell us what took you from just the creative pursuits that you had before to wanting to actually make a film.
I mean, I'm into creative pursuits because I just love being poor. I could get into finance, but then I would be rich, and that would be a problem. So, I think that everybody just has different things that God calls them to, and different things in your heart that you just know you're made to kind of go after. And I knew that even when I was in seminary, I had a kind of a prayer vision, if you will, when I was asking God, like, okay, what do you want me to do with my life when I leave? I don't know like how I could possibly like take care of a family or have a career. And I just had this kind of image of a pen and paper come to me. And I thought that was kind of silly because in my mind, creativity has never been a career path. And, when I was growing up, it wasn't like, oh yeah, like we have lots of examples of creatives who are making like, career choices. It's like, if you want to be an artist, you're going to starve to death. So try to do something different. And as much as I tried to, my dad is a creative, and frankly, unfortunately, he also had that perspective. It was like, like this is nice as a hobby, but if you want to actually like provide for a family, you're going to have to like find a different way. And I had that in the back of my head. And unfortunately, God had to do a lot of like healing of my vision to actually begin to value creativity from an economic perspective, and to start seeing it as business, as viable. And I think that there's just something in the culture of the church right now that says, things like apologetics, things like politics, and then concrete ways of serving people. These are the ways that we should try to move forward in culture. But unfortunately, those things are all upstream of like the underlying values that a culture has that are articulated and communicated through art and beauty. So it's kind of like a risky place to go from trying to start businesses, but also a place where if we abdicate, we're going to lose the culture, and I'm realizing that.
Anthony, you have chatted with, and one of my colleagues at Castletown Media, which for listeners who don't know, Castletown Media is an explicitly Catholic film studio and marketing organization. And I've had so many conversations with Tim. I'd imagine the two of you probably have, talking about the entertainment industry in general, dominated by Hollywood and stuff, and from a Christian perspective, how problematic it is, seemingly getting worse. I mean, I have very fond memories of going to Disneyland, Disney World on family vacations when I was growing up. I'll be honest, I don't trust Disney whatsoever anymore. I will not touch anything Disney. My children will not touch anything Disney unless Disney radically changes. And that's tragic because, that was a fundamental part of my childhood. And even looking back at a lot of the films and stuff, I don't think there's anything wrong with almost any of them up until, say, 15 years ago, whenever it was, when there was like this ideological capture of whether it's the woke culture. Even before it was called woke, it was that seeping into Hollywood generally, and this didn't happen overnight. This was a very slow build. So I know we're maybe in a bit of an echo chamber here, but you still are a professional in this space. You know this space infinitely better than the average Catholic would. What is your kind of assessment, as it were, on the entertainment landscape, specifically with reference to Hollywood, as we have this conversation in 2025?
Yeah, I guess I'll take it. You could take that question in a lot of ways. I think I'm going to speak about it from the perspective of like the individual. Like, why is it this way? And I think it has a lot more to do with what the church is presenting of itself versus what the culture is presenting of itself, and who is attracted to what team, right? I think that there are just certain capacities for artistry that some people have that make them more bent towards being in a creative field and more driven towards that. One of those is the trait openness, which is a trait that generally has been, monopolized by the left, at least in the modern kind of ecosystem. And Walt Disney himself is sort of an interesting example of this because he was actually very open, but was also a very traditional family man. And I think it was because of his structural fusion of openness and also of like tradition that actually built a marriage inside of a company that could really, really affect culture and become sort of like a bedrock of culture. Tolkien is a really good example of this as well. C.S. Lewis, these are all people who, besides cultivating a love for tradition, they also cultivated this incredible ability to have their minds open to like different various ideas, to beauty, etc. If you go to a normal Sunday thing at any church, just aside from all the normal problems that you see of just like not enough young people in general being there, you will also almost never see, even if you go to the places where the faith is most alive, you're not going to see a lot of people with tattoos and with really weird hairstyles. You're going to see people with like traditional button-up shirts, tucked into their pants with like almost like a weird shabby like flannel jacket that is an homage to the 1940s, right? But you're mainly seeing people who are engineers, teachers, finance people, corporate people, professionals, etc. You're not seeing people who are like on the average. You're not seeing lots of the creatives, and I think this is a problem that we as a church culture sort of got into through becoming so focused on responding to evangelicals and responding to the Enlightenment that we began playing the game of the Enlightenment and playing the game by the rule book of the sort of hyper-scholastic, iconoclastic, evangelical, Protestant kind of movement. And so this has been going on for a very, very long time as the church has kind of modeled itself after her enemies rather than modeling herself after her own founder and the way that he communicates. So if you go and listen to homilies, you're not hearing lots of parables. You're not hearing lots of stories. You're hearing much more didactic theology. I can talk at length about the problems in Hollywood. I'm talking more about the problems in the church because I think that when we want to look at culture and say, why is the culture the problem? That really should point us towards like what's wrong in us that's causing this. Like we have the greatest story ever told, the most beauty, the most the most truth in terms of living. You are going to be a happier person if you are living inside of the values of the Catholic faith. And so why is it so hard to bring people and initiate people into that? I think a big part of that is because we're just not being ourselves and we don't look like the truth that we are talking about. And so I think that has been going on for a very long time and is something that has caused the problem in Hollywood, that is this exit of all of the people who are kind of creative in our faith.
Anthony, something I want to inquire, and I don't want to take us too far off topic, but something as you were talking that I realize is we do have friends that are creatives and that have kind of gone on to their creative professions, but as you mentioned, it's kind of dominated by the far left even, and when people even with Catholic values go into that field, it's kind of tough to foster, the values that we grew up with and stuff. So, even if you have like really solid Catholics who are going to these creative professions, like how do we turn them into another C.S. Lewis, another Tolkien, another Walt Disney, another Anthony D'Ambrosio?
That's hilarious. I will be on the team of like looking to become like Tolkien, and if I accomplish that in my lifetime, then I think we'll all be successful. But I would say that really the thing you have to understand is that, now if you want to be cool, if you want to be successful in the creative industry, you have to accept all of the things that, all the values that are sort of being presented there. And all of the hiring processes, all of the sticks and carrots are built. And I think you can obviously see this in what is being made. They're not built for, hey, make the best kind of thing that you can make. It is be the most on our team, like pronouncing our worldview type things. I mean, if you want to submit a film to South by Southwest, like all of the first questions, they're not about your film. They're about, are you gay? Are you LGBTQ? Are you like
Totally.
what race? All of those things are the very first things that you are asked. And as a director, if you do not have those traits, as many people are already realizing, even in other professions now, like you're not going to be hired for leadership. And so I think that either you have to become an ally to those people to get brought up with them, or there has to be a parallel industry that's built that does all the same things and offers, sticks and carrots of its own according to its own values. And that's what I'm hoping to help build, as well as the guys at Castletown Media and some of these other people who are part of this renaissance of art, beauty, and film in particular.
Yeah, you're tapping, Anthony, into topics that we've covered many times. The rat poison ideology of DEI and like how much it has captured, governments in the Western world, big corporations in the Western world, certainly the entertainment industry, whether it's music, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's television, it takes 3 seconds with your eyes open to realize that just almost everything in the mainstream media has bought into this worldview, whether it was intentional or not. It's implied. Just by the nature of like the three of us being men, we're already like we're already on the losing team to some extent. Being heterosexual men, you're definitely on the losing side. If you won't affirm all the non-heterosexuals, you've lost already, and you're like a bigoted enemy of this ideology that's captured the worldview. That's true. That's right. You're winning the race against us. But Anthony is like bottom of the pile because his father's a theologian and a Catholic. So it's just like you are at the very back of the list. It's the opposite of a meritocracy, sadly.
Right.
But it is what it is. Unfortunately. Now, having said that, I also think, as where we are in 2025, I think there's reasons for optimism. I think there's reasons for hope. Like I think any person who hasn't been completely taken over by like the far left worldview, which would be the majority of people, I think even reasonable average people who aren't necessarily Christians can see that something's a bit off. Like, it just feels like it's off. I really sincerely believe that. And I think that is part of the reason for what you mentioned, Anthony, like this renaissance, to maybe use that terminology, surrounding Catholic creatives building things for consumers who want goodness, who want truth, who want beauty, and aren't like pandering to this propagandized ideology that's being shoved down our throats everywhere, including from Hollywood, filmmakers and stuff. So maybe, by way of like background and stuff, let's talk about this film that you're working on. How did you even start thinking about making a film, given the landscape that we've described, and what led you to the point where now you've actually done it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So after doing youth ministry, I found myself, 6 years in, you're like, I've got to find something else, and that pressure is starting to build. I just went to a local digital marketing agency that I thought was doing really cool stuff, working in the startup industry, and I just asked the owner, hey, I will give you 20 hours a week for free if you mentor me and show me the ropes and sort of bring me into your company, knowing that was kind of like the master's education that I needed to get if I was going to find my way into the industry. And that led to getting put into sales and account management, as they found that I had a certain like knack for that. And as I was selling, there were certain clients or potential clients that did not fit into kind of the structures of this particular agency. And I just hit up my brother, who was becoming a very good graphic designer, talented in his own right. And I was like, hey, you want to just start taking some things on the side, maybe make a couple $1,000s extra, with all of the extra time that we have on top of our full-time jobs and then our internships. And he was like, great, let's do it. Because, the energy of youth is boundless. And we, of course, started making like $10,000 to $20,000 websites with like custom product photography and all of these things that would have been that should have cost a lot more than we were actually charging people, because we didn't know how to price things in at all yet. And so we blew up. We were losing money hand over fist, but I think the word just got out that there was like a new team on the street that was like doing things for way cheaper than anyone else. And all of a sudden we had an agency on our hands, and we started doing that. I quit my job and went full time. And in the midst of that, I also suffered a health crisis. I was starting to make, commercials and direct some commercials. So I was getting my foot in that, but, I had a health, breakdown that caused some really serious suffering in my life. That was ultimately, we later found, was caused by a chronic mold infection. But at the time there was no diagnosis. Nobody could figure it out. Everybody just thought I was going crazy. I was sleeping like 2 hours a night, and that was just creating chaos all throughout my life. And as I was, bedridden and spending all of this time kind of in the darkness, just hoping for sleep, I began to have these conversations with God, and they were very angry and very honest. Like, why would you allow this to happen? And how could a good God that has called me to all of this, and given me this mission, all of a sudden take away my ability to accomplish that mission and just put me in this sort of really meaningless suffering that doesn't allow me to testify to him. It's not like doing anything for anybody. And it just felt really meaningless, as suffering, I think, often does. And so I think that there was some client that kind of prompted a little dive into Maximilian Kolbe at the time. I'm not really even sure what it was, but I remember just reading a snippet of Maximilian Kolbe's life, and I had known that he traded his life for another man in Auschwitz. I knew that he starved to death and that he survived for an inhuman amount of time without food or water. And I thought that he did that rather, alone, that these other men in the cell with him had all kind of passed and he was just sort of this last holdout. But it turns out that he was actually alive with 4 other men, and was executed with 4 other men. And as I realized what that journey must have accomplished, I knew that, what I was going through was sort of akin to hunger. I am locked into a cell of suffering and poor health. And for me to just stay alive, to make it to the next day without, offing myself, was like a massive, massive trial of willpower and of faith and of hope. And I knew that in some way Kolbe had given that gift of hope to those other men that he was in the cell with, even though their situation was far worse than mine, looked even more nihilistic. They all had stories that were as complicated and beautiful as my own story, that were all snipped short by this incredible evil. And God allowed that to happen. And in some way, his answer was sending a saint to be with them in the midst of their suffering. And so I began to have these sort of imaginary conversations with Kolbe in my, like sleep deprived brain. And those conversations turned into like a script for a short film that we ended up making, and it had a lot of power to it. People saw it and wanted to see us make a bigger splash with it and take it to the next level. And we got investment to make the feature film.
Awesome. Actually, something you mentioned there is, how St. Kolbe's story resonated with you. Something that I've noticed with the narrative of his story is that it usually starts with, the apparition of Mary, and then ending kind of with his death. But I think your take on this movie actually tells almost a separate side of the story that isn't often told. Is that right?
Yeah. So because of my own personal experience with this, I kind of experienced friendship with Kolbe from within the cell. Many people know Kolbe's story from the perspective of the man whose life he saved. And I think while that's beautiful, I thought that it was profoundly interesting to think about, okay, he saved a man, but I don't think any of those other men in the cell gave a shit about that. Like, they weren't saved. They were having to suffer. So, like, what does Kolbe have to say to them for 14 days while they're all suffering together? And that to me was an example that was really that I just knew there was more to him and more to his story than a more shallow, just like self-sacrificial moment. Not that that's shallow, but just the story is really basic. It's kind of two-dimensional if you just look at it from that perspective. But here's a priest who's entering into willingly starvation and death, to do that with an accompaniment with these other men who he also knew from his prison block. What was going on in his mind, and how was he trying to speak to them, to help them come along with him into sainthood and into the heaven that he knew was in store for him. And that's really the story that we're telling with our movie.
How did you actually make the movie? Like, I know a bit of the story, but would love to hear it from you. Like, it's not like you did this in your backyard. Like, this was a big deal. It was a huge commitment for you personally. Obviously, it came about because you were in a place of darkness, going through deep suffering and everything. So, walk us through how this movie was actually made. Like, what did you the lengths that you actually went to get this put together?
Well, the writing of the script was like the thing that I was doing to stay alive during some of the harder parts of that time.
Wow.
I think, if you're just, you don't have any hope that the next day is going to be any different. You're sleeping 2 hours a night, ongoing, and that's just life. You can't really do anything. And yet at the same time, you're awake and you can't rest. So writing was perhaps like the most difficult trial of the whole thing. To be in the midst of that suffering while also trying to kind of, reach out to Kolbe for that hope. But I think that it produced something that was really, really powerful and had like a depth to it that just has real weight and gravitas. And once we started to share the script around, frankly, it didn't take that long to raise the money. I'm not somebody that's raised a lot of money before. I was like, basically what I'm asking for is somebody to give me a house so that I can go to Poland and spend all of that money instead of on a house on artists. Like, that's crazy. I think though people saw in the short film and in the script just something that needed to happen in the church. And even if they didn't quite understand how the business side of it would work, because I'll tell you, like, there are no Catholic investors that I know of that have invested in film, perhaps they've one or two successfully. So it's almost like a categorical, I don't know this industry, I don't invest in it. But we had like very sophisticated P&E guys and like mom and pops who just wanted to we even had a youth minister who put 10K in after she sold her house. So it was a real grassroots effort. And once we had enough, that was April, and I had made this promise to the investors: if we raise it by the end of April, we're going to shoot it this year. And we went out to Poland without knowing anybody, without having any contacts. It's like, think about making a film. If anybody has helped participate in planning a wedding or helping with a wedding, you kind of understand the logistics that are necessary for making a film. It's very similar. It's an event. You have the whole logistics, the lodging, the food, the makeup, the back end, the cars, the transportation, the flight travel and logistics, finding the right vendors, negotiating with the right vendors, keeping things under budget, all of that stuff. But you have to do all of that 20 days in a row for this month. And also, you're doing it in a place where you don't know the language. You don't have family to help you, to bail you out when something goes wrong. Amazon doesn't exist. It was like an incredible challenge of just like kind of grit, and also trusting a team. And I could, go on for many moments, of what this meant. But, often we had to be beggars ourselves. We didn't have enough money to really do a film the way normally people do it. We were doing it as missionaries. And so that meant that we were packing 100 people into a hostel that didn't even have a dining table and a kitchen. It was just like beds, literally just cots, like 3 rooms of cots, and everybody's like living in community. You don't even have space to put your stuff. And you're just getting up at 7 a.m., going to bed at like 1 or 2, and doing it all over again every day, trying to bring yourself to this really magnificent and like very important, profound story. We had to get people who are actors who were willing to starve themselves on a starvation diet, to lose like a lot of weight, to be able to play this convincingly, and also pay them like $100 a day. Like we're looking for impossible needles in a haystack over and over and over and over again, all knowing that if we miss our time window, everything falls apart. Like the stakes are, we get this done before the winter hits and it becomes too cold for us to shoot, or like the whole project kind of disintegrates. So we just made an all-in move, going out there without even fully enough raised to finish it, and just kind of, or even to come back really, and started going after it. And there were like so many moments where you just have these crises happen. I mean, one example of this, we have a scene in the film. It's a bit of a spoiler, but we have a scene in the film where all of the 10 men eat a rat together. It's very graphic, very intense, gritty. Like, we wanted to see the actual guts kind of coming out on the teeth. Like, we want to make people feel really uncomfortable in this scene. And so we needed something really realistic, and we hired a guy for like $2,000 to make an edible rat. You think about like, what does it take to make a life realistic edible rat? Like, that's going to be kind of expensive. You need like a particular kind of artist that can do that. And so we had to like, hunt that down, find it. We're about to shoot the scene 2 days out, and the guy sends us a picture of a half-made, very unedible looking and also unratable looking like prop, and we're like, this is not going to work. And he's like, if you want me to finish it, it's going to be 5 times the price. And
Wow.
This is like kind of a classic, honestly, something that we found was pretty often in Eastern Europe. Like, it's a different culture, and you can't take people on a handshake. Like, what would often happen would be they didn't do due diligence on putting it out there, whatever, but people had no problem completely going back on their word and coming back to you with like exorbitant pricing. So I was just so used to that, and we were just like, sayonara, buddy, like we're going to figure this out ourselves. And I just told a couple people on our team who were not art directors, like, you guys are going to have to find the rat. You're going to have to figure this out. You got literally 8 hours to do this before we start shooting this scene. One guy actually had bought like I don't know, it was like some sort of keychain type like rabbit thing at a some sort of store, and was like, hey, maybe we can use this. And another person was like, let's just get some prosciutto and like she went to the grocery store and just like filled it with like red meat looking food, and it ended up looking amazing. And it came together perfectly, and people who watch it now are just like really trying not to vomit because they literally think that everybody's eating a real rat. So all that to say, like, things like that would just be happening every single day. Problems that just you would never expect that you would have to solve, that we had to figure out. I mean, for instance, another one was that we have to shoot this scene in the exterior of Auschwitz where all of the main actors and all the main prisoners are shaved. This is a very big part of Auschwitz. Nobody has hair, right? Like that's kind of baseline importance. So we put that in all the contracts with all the actors. And we get there to shoot for the first day, and one of the main actors, one of the main 10 men is like, actually, I can't shave for a week. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you this. I've got this other production that I'm running back to that I need to have my beard for, because it's like we started shooting something else in continuity. It would ruin everything if I like show up to that other thing with my beard. So I'm literally in the middle of like shooting this, like all of these other crazy things that are happening, managing hundreds of volunteers. And I'm on the phone with like, is there a beard specialist that can literally cut this guy's beard off and then 3D model his face and sew each hair back on exactly as it was so that he can put a fake beard of his own beard back on for this other production in Germany this next weekend. Otherwise, we're going to have to reschedule this whole shoot, which is like going to cost us $50,000. Like, you know, like these are sort of the crazy things that are happening every day. And it's only by God's providence that like we found people that would all like kind of magically show up at the right time to help us fix them. But yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing this side of it. Like, you know, I've never even thought deep enough into, you know, behind the scenes of making a movie or anything. But even when you do kind of see documentaries or kind of behind the scene footage and stuff, it's of like massive movies with huge budgets, right? The actors have like RV dressing rooms and, you know, catered lunches and stuff. Like this is a very different side of the filmmaking business. And like you said, you know, it's probably because the Holy Spirit was driving this that it was even possible to do in the first place.
Yeah, and it just took too many miracles, man. Yeah,
and you've done it obviously very clearly outside like the typical Hollywood system that most people, when the average person, even the average Catholic, thinks about movies, they'll think about something that's coming out of Hollywood, and clearly that's not what you guys were doing. That wasn't your experience. So where are things at today? You know, we're recording this episode in early 2025. Where does it stand so far in terms of getting this film to a place that people who want to see it can see it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We just finished Picture Lock, which is the edit of the story, and now we're moving into visual effects, music composition, color grading, sound design, all of that, the extra polishing stuff that really make a movie feel immersive, and that will be done by March, April, somewhere in there. And in the meantime, we're now working on a grassroots campaign to distribute the film, both theatrically and also with streaming, in the fall. So if you are in Canada, there will be a way that you can kind of raise your hand and say that you'd like to help bring it to your city. I don't know if we're going to be doing a full like theatrical release there, but there will also be ways of like kind of bringing screenings there during the fall. And then if you're in the US, there will be likely theaters in a city near you if you're near a major city, or you're going to be able to kind of recruit the other volunteers in your kind of community to help bring it to your town, if it's not the case that it's already there with a full theatrical release. And then in the meantime, there will also be plans for streaming. We've got partnerships that are kind of budding with lots of other fun organizations that I'm not fully at liberty to talk about yet, but it's going to be a very creative and very, very new, hitching in the face type of marketing and release for a film that the Catholic world hasn't quite seen yet before.
That's really exciting to think about, and you know, I'm looking forward to seeing this play out. I think, you know, I will be praying for you and the team and stuff, because I just want to see this film like exist. I just want to selfishly see it as a consumer. I want to see this film because I think the story of you know, Saint Maximilian Kolbe is a profound story. It's a hard story, of course, as there's so many stories of so many of the saints, but the hardness of it doesn't mean that it's not one that we shouldn't familiarize ourselves with. And I think that it comes from such a raw place of your own, like you found this story as a way of getting through your own suffering. And I think that alone will resonate with many people, because we all suffer in this life. Some of us more than others, some of us at times when others aren't, but we all suffer. We know that that's the case. And so for those reasons, I'm really looking forward to seeing this this film in whatever capacity that is. For those that are listening and want to learn more, maybe participate, if you guys are raising money or depending on when you're listening to this episode, where can people learn more about the film and where you guys are at with it at present?
Yeah, triumphoftheheart.com is the best place. That's our website. And then you can also follow it on Instagram at Triumph of the Heart, or you can find me at the Dambro.
Perfect. Awesome. One more thing I wanted to add for our listeners, people who are Catholics who want to live their faith out more actively. I know that not all of us are very outspoken about our faith. Not all of us can do mission work. We're all in different walks of life. But when people like Anthony, people who are creators, they go out and they do projects like this. Like you don't necessarily have to be an investor in the movie, but go watch it. Go watch it, then share it with a friend and tell them to go watch it. Like there are ways to support that aren't necessarily going to take a lot out of you or require a lot from you. So I highly encourage you to support not only Anthony's projects, but all the other projects that you're seeing that are coming out that are, seem like this is doing a lot of good for the church and stuff. Well, then go support it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I would say to add to that, the evangelicals understand this, in that, like, even if a movie isn't like the best movie in the entire world, they see they're showing up to it as a vote that more of this would be made.
Yes.
And I think for us as Catholics, we are steeped in an intellectual tradition that like gives us a lot higher of a taste and a higher bar. And that makes us sort of a little bit more like, we've all been wounded by the crappiness of things that have come out, and we're very skeptical and don't want to really, like, I don't know, we're going to wait for 5 or 6 people to tell us, go and see this thing before we're going to go to it. And unfortunately, that is a recipe for disaster in the filmmaking industry, because everything depends for films on opening weekend. If you don't go and see it on opening weekend, it's not going to be made available for much longer, and it will go out of theaters, go out of the system. Everybody will see that as a proof that Catholics don't show up to film, and then the whole kind of flywheel turns even further against us making better things. So it's an argument that I think is really important for people to understand, that you're not just showing up to have like a consuming experience of the thing. You're showing up to say, I'm standing with, this industry and hoping that this industry succeeds.
Yeah, that's right. And we've made this appeal in other episodes to for other guests that have joined us. But I think it's really important. Like, we have to support one another. Those of us who are out there on the front lines doing things like, whether it's creating content in a podcast format, whether it's doing interviews, whether it's creating films like Anthony and his team are. Like, if we want to see this stuff exist, we have to support those who are doing it. And how you can do that? Yes, you can do that verbally. Yes, you can do it with your prayers. Keep doing that. Don't stop doing those things, but also like make it economically viable for those that are doing it. Support them with your dollars, right? Stop giving more money to like the horse manure creators in Hollywood and give it to people that are creating things that are true, that are good, that are beautiful, like Anthony and his team. So, that's my personal appeal to those of you listening to support Anthony and his team. We'll put a link in the show notes to where you can learn more about the film itself. And, I will ask again, please do support Anthony and his team so that we can see this and that we can see more things like this, more stories like this come to life, grounded in the Catholic faith. Rigel, do you want to wrap us up with a quick prayer here?
For sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you as always for the platforms you have enabled to amplify the voices of your faithful. Help us all to be good stewards of the power and influence in each of our hands. Let your Holy Spirit always guide our endeavors and strengthen us to put our selfish impulses aside. We pray especially today for Anthony and the rest of the team behind Triumph of the Heart, a movie telling the story of one who loved you so much. We pray all this through the intercession of St. Maximilian Kolbe. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, Anthony, thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to chatting with you again, and also to of course, following the story as it develops and to seeing it in due order. To those of you that have tuned in, again, please check out Anthony's team and their work, both the Sherwood Fellows and Triumph of the Heart. And please do tune in again for another episode of the podcast. Until then, this has been Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. God bless you all.
God bless.
Thank you.